Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a sort of long-awaited video that I've promised for a bit on a discussion about which Warhammer Fantasy rule set I'm going to start with to start playing Warhammer Fantasy again, and also, how that relates to my Beastmen Army, because I've done a video already taking stock of the Beastmen Horde. I will have that show at the end of the video in the description if you want to see that, because that's a bit of the context. One of the big projects I'm looking at doing this year, once I tie up some loose ends, is my Beastmen Army, getting a good portion of it done, or some progress on it. And one of the folks that actually I've been chatting a little bit off and on over the last year about this is with Dan Booman. He's doing his Bretonians, if you follow his channel. I think he was looking at different rule sets as to which one to choose. I am looking at using an actual Warhammer Fantasy rule set. I may actually look at the 9th Age too, but I'm looking at starting for sure and using a Warhammer Fantasy rule set. Now, whenever you talk about a game that's gone as long as this one has, really predating Warhammer 40k and then ending with the 8th edition and the End Times sort of supplements to that, you're going to have lots of people that are going to have different opinions on which is the best one. In many cases, there won't be a best one, or there'll be really good parts of one versus good parts of another. And I think that if you look at forums and look at discussions where people talk about this, I think it's safe to say that in my experience, regardless of which one's the best or what an individual's opinion is, there are three that always tend to jump out and people congregate around the most. And those are three that I actually have in front of you. And that is, I have in the center Warhammer Fantasy Battle 3rd Edition. I have to the left Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th Edition. And to the right, I have Warhammer Fantasy Battle 8th Edition. Now, I don't profess to be an expert on this game in a lot of ways, although I've dabbled in looking into getting into it over time and at different stages in my gaming. I've never really played Warhammer Fantasy Battles, like, routinely. And so I'm just going to give my opinion as to, despite that, why I chose the one I'm going to start with. And what I would just say is that Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th Edition is one that often comes up, and it would be, in some ways, as I see it, kind of closer to the 8th Edition or the current gaming where you build lists, and it's not as narrative driven where you're building each character in a unit or decking it out to any degree that you want. There were lists, a book that was supplemented to this book for 3rd edition where you could start doing lists as well. I believe it's called the Book of Battles. It came out after this book, but before 4th edition, to my understanding. And so it's not that you were that far from getting to that point where you could start doing list building and that kind of stuff, but it was definitely ingrained by this point for 6th edition. I may have this wrong, but my understanding is that in 6th edition, and I'm just going left to right here, 6th edition, folks, they sort of changed the rules in a way to get away a little bit from what they call Hero Hammer, which I believe before 6th edition, perhaps in 5th edition, was a little bit more intense, where you're putting more points into big heroes that could really minimize the effect of large amounts of low point infantry, if you actually have really powerful characters. And so sometimes in different editions or in different games, there's a focus on rank and file infantry and putting your focus on that kind of stuff versus special characters. And my understanding is there was a little bit of a pulling back from the special characters and focusing that way to focusing on your rank and file troops and how you use them in your lists. Now, for the 3rd edition in the center, it's, as I understand it, considered to be a sweet spot of many old Hammer folks, in the sense that it's really, really early days in the game, and when you look at the book, there's a lot of common even with Dungeons and Dragons at the time, because two things that were sort of happening together. You know, there are a lot of creatures that you'll see like listed in the bestiaries sections that you won't necessarily see in later editions, and you know, there's more room. I would kind of liken it to Rogue Trader of Warhammer 40k. There's a lot more depth and granularity to the rules. People might call it, you know, pretty high on the clunkiness, but then some people really like that. They like to go really far in depth, and they like the sort of level of detail and the freedom to express that detail and creating things exactly the way you want. So many folks actually like that, and so if you're looking for an older and much more clunkier game, then I think, and you find that rich, like to, you know, have richness within it, I think that the one in the center there, the Warhammer Fantasy Battles 3rd edition, may appeal to you. Now, I actually started reading this one when I bought it, and I really enjoyed just reading it. Like, there's a lot of nostalgia just in reading the way the print was done, and you can just tell that this is something just from, I believe it's early 80s. Certainly no more than mid-80s, I don't believe. And you really reflects it in there, and so it's a bit of a trip even just going down that lane and just looking at it, let alone, you know, collecting a bit of an old Hammer army and just getting a really different experience, going back in time a bit, playing a game in that style. Some folks would be much better at talking about how, when, let's say in melee mass combat, how it results in 3rd edition versus the later editions and why they like that better. I mean, I did see the level of detail and the kind of stuff that can happen, but to be honest, I'm actually really interested in playing this one, but I'm actually choosing to do it as the second one I try, in order to get my stuff painted and play it a bit faster with a bit more current game that's sort of similar to something that I might identify with that I've played more in recent years, maybe a little less clunky, just to be able to get stuff on the table. And so I am looking at definitely exploring that more as a long-term sort of rule set to delve into. And that's why I'm really happy that I do have a copy in really good condition, because it's a really old book. Lastly, just because we're going left to right here, I've got Warhammer 8th edition. Warhammer 8th edition is the biggest rule book that I own for like a set of rules in hardbound. A lot of people really liked 8th edition. I mean, I think if you look at the level of frustration that came into, or I guess prior to the Ninth Age developing, I mean, I think a big part of the frustration of losing their game was a big part of the formation of the Ninth Age and the spirit around it. You know, I actually think the Ninth Age, from what I've seen, which is very little, but just from my following of it at a cursory level, has a lot of positive energy associated with it, so I'm not saying that it's based on a negative attitude, but I do believe that there was a lot of disappointment when the game was finally canceled, and I do think that that initially fueled a bit of the development of the Ninth Age, to try to retain that. My understanding is that in 8th edition, compared to some of the other editions prior to it, there was a bit more power put into magic. Perhaps even the whole Hero Hammer thing started to creep in again. I don't know that for a fact. I mean, there are a lot of people that just say that there was absolutely nothing wrong with 8th edition. It's their favorite edition. And having said that, you know, when looking at those forums I've referenced, or when I see polls of people around this, I really see people just kind of gravitate to either one of these. I don't see a major dominant force. Like, if I go into the Old Hammer forums, for sure, 3rd edition's a bit of a dominant force. Once I start going into general groups of people, I see among all three many folks liking 6th edition, and as well. And so I had to think about, for my Beastmen, what I'm going to do. Like, how am I going to approach this? Because I do find having a game in hand that I'm reading and things like that while I'm painting up an army is inspiring. I'm looking at how I'm going to use it, may even determine a little bit on the way I'm going to paint things and the order I'm going to paint things. I have a lot to do. I've already decided when I approach my Beastmen army, I'm not going to paint everything of one type like I normally would. Like, I would typically, in structural fashion, grab everything of one kind. So let's say my huge unit of Bestigors, paint 40 to 50 of them, and then move to the next thing. And then when I'm done, I have a complete army, and I've done it in sequential fashion. I've decided that given the number of points that I likely have, and the amount of models, and the length of time it's going to happen, and the multiple projects, and the potential for burnout, it's not the way I want to paint the Beastmen Army. I've already decided that I'm looking at, initially I was thinking 1,500, but I'm actually looking at initially just painting 1,000 points of Beastmen. And I will grab like just from each of them, and then look forward to painting more of that kind again in the future. Just enough to work on my 1,000 points, and I will likely use a codex of some sort. I've already kind of hinted that I'm not doing the 3rd edition first, that I'd like to do that next, you know, as a long-term thing. So the question is do I do 6th edition or I do 8th edition? Well, those of you that kind of know me pretty well, or you may have seen comments in the past, then you would know that I've chosen 6th edition, and so this is the one that I've chosen. It is quite a bit thinner than the 8th edition. You look at the book. That really isn't the reason why. There is a bit of nostalgia in all of this to some degree. Maybe not so much the 8th edition, but I actually purchased this when it was brand new, even though I wasn't a Warhammer Fantasy Battle player. And I'm guessing it was in the area of 2000. And I had one of the early lessons in life in my time of miniature gaming was the whole experience of being drawn into a game to have somebody abandon you immediately that you were planning on getting into it with. And so I had a friend at work, and we were friends just purely through work, but we became friends outside of work, and we were both kind of nerds. And he had just said, hey, do you want to play Warhammer? And like, he was thinking fantasy battles, and so he went out and purchased an army. I went out and purchased an army. We barely kind of got through the rules, played one game, and then it was never done again. And so it was sort of an early situation that many of us have experienced, where you just sort of, the things get abandoned, and then you think, wow, this is like the most costly and inefficient hobby I've ever been in. The amount of time to read the rules and to paint and to actually do all of that, like, and then, you know, and the money, and then to have it play it once. But I never threw it away, and I'm glad now, because I also have Mordheim, and I believe from the look of the book that it was done at the same time. The font and the design, it was very much seems to be at the same time. And so there's a little bit of a nostalgic piece, because like, I had this when it was new. It adds a little bit of great flavor to choosing this one. And when looking at it, it does almost feel like it's a little bit in between, like, as it should, between 3rd edition and 8th edition. And so I thought it would be really cool just to start with this. And I do, if it is at all true that they move towards more unit base and less big heroes, I thought that was a good place to start for me, because I'm probably not as much interested in learning how to trick out an individual miniature to be like really all powerful and stuff like that. And I'm not accusing that of 8th edition, for those of you that like 8th edition, but if that is the case, I think I prefer this kind where, you know, you have your heroes, they're better, you pay more for them, but like, they can die too, and pretty easily, and like, you still have to have a good military tactical strategy to try to win the combat. And so initially I made a bit of a mistake in my head in thinking that with 6th edition it would be a little bit more controlled on the sort of building out the lists to huge numbers as compared to maybe 8th edition. It may be true that you need bigger armies in 8th edition, or it evolved to that, but looking at it, they almost look the same to me. And to be honest, I do think that there appear to be less models on each side in the pictures in 3rd edition versus 6th and 8th. However, there are some still big tables of miniatures, so I do think, like always, that just really depends on what you're planning to do. But I do have the Codex for Beastmen, one of them, because I believe there's 2 kinds, but this is Beasts of Chaos. I think that they may have released more than one kind. It also has some really cool nostalgic printing, and they give you some good options for the army. I do believe it's going to have more depth to your choice as it evolved than probably 3rd edition. However, in 3rd edition, there may be the ability to almost create whatever you want, because it's that kind of game. There's a lot of tools within the rule set, and there's just a lot of stuff that's also just dropped from the Warhammer universe later, totally. So I think I've got pretty much what I need within this one to definitely be able to play this as far as models go. And so 1,000 points within 6th edition is, I think, the way I'm going to go. And really looking forward to it. I do love these books. And so I think I will try to just do a little bit from each section within my Beastmen Army. I may avoid a couple of different types of models just to get to the 1,000 points. I don't know that I'll be able to fit all of the different types I have, given the amount that I've purchased already, into that 1,000 points. But I think it's a really good place to start. So that's actually sort of the intro and my sort of really, I guess, brief, broad analysis as to why I chose the one I did. For those of you that have a lot of experience in Warhammer Fantasy, I actually do appreciate your opinions in the comments. As I said, I've done some delving into this. I've had some periphery exposure, but by no means do I consider myself, you know, the best source even for my own decision making. There was one thing I read, and I don't remember it now, but apparently there was a rule in the rank and file battles is how you determine winning a melee that they added in 8th edition, that many people, even though they chose 6th as their favorite rule set, felt that the addition of that rule in 8th should be transferred retroactively to 6th in their games, because they felt it was just such a good addition within 8th edition. Maybe it was 7th, but it was definitely the 6th edition players that were saying this is one thing that we would still include. And so if any of you know which one that is, just off the top of your head, that would be good to know. Otherwise I'm going to have to figure out the hard way by reading all of the books. But that can be done as well. So yeah, like one of the two big projects is going to be, as I've said, the Beastmen, and it will be for 6th edition. That's my sort of surface level reason as to why I am choosing it. Taking in nostalgia, other people's opinions, my first look at it, lots of different things. And next up in this sort of series, probably not my next video, but I will be doing one very similar to this, where I'm actually taking stock of my French Indian War stuff in the same way I took stock of my Beastmen stuff, because I have a large purchase that I purchased in the fall to do this year for French Indian War miniatures, and I will be using those for another game, not just Musket and Tomahawks, and we'll talk about that more in that video. Okay, hope you guys are having a good one. Take care.